was a bitterly cold morning in Chicago when the heavy oak doors of the Lexington Grand Hotel swung open, allowing a gust of frigid air to sweep into the marble-clad lobby. Ethan Caldwell, the hotel's owner, stood by the concierge desk, his tailored suit impeccable, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with the detached arrogance of a man who had never known struggle. At that moment, a man stepped inside, his boots leaving wet imprints on the pristine floor. He wore a military-issued jacket, frayed at the edges, and his face bore the marks of a hard life. Lines of experience, of pain, of battles fought in places most wouldn't dare imagine. He carried a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and his posture, though weary, held the disciplined stance of a soldier. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "I need a room for the night." Ethan barely spared him a glance. "We don't have vacancies," he replied curtly, even though the hotel was at less than half capacity. The veteran's eyes flickered with a quiet understanding, as if he had been through this kind of rejection before. "Please," the man tried again, keeping his tone even. "Just for the night, I can pay." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a neatly folded stack of bills. Ethan sighed, barely concealing his irritation. "I don't think you understand. We don't accommodate vagrants." The lobby had grown silent. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, and a few lingering guests looked away, embarrassed by the blatant discrimination on display. The veteran's jaw tightened, but he refused to lose his temper. With a slow nod, he pocketed his money and turned toward the door. As he stepped outside into the unforgiving cold, Ethan muttered under his breath, "Should have known better." 2 hours later, everything changed. The wail of sirens filled the air, and before Ethan could process what was happening, a convoy of military vehicles pulled up in front of the hotel. Armed soldiers, clad in tactical gear, poured out, their faces grim and unreadable. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, marched toward the entrance. Behind him, the veteran who had been turned away stood with an air of quiet authority. Ethan rushed forward, his confidence wavering. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. The officer handed him a document. "By order of the United States Army, this establishment is under temporary military jurisdiction." Ethan's face turned pale. "You can't just—" "We can," the officer interrupted, "and we have reason to believe that this hotel has been harboring illegal activities." Ethan's heart pounded. "That's absurd!" The veteran stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. "You should have known better," he said, the words echoing back with haunting familiarity. The soldiers moved in, sweeping through the hotel with precision, checking records, searching rooms. Ethan could do nothing but watch as his empire crumbled before his eyes. The veteran, whose name was Captain Daniel Hayes, observed in silence, his expression unreadable. Ethan felt his carefully curated world slipping away. He had built this empire on power, influence, and ruthless business decisions, but he had failed to recognize the one thing that truly mattered: respect. As the soldiers continued their work, Ethan's mind raced. How had this happened? Who had orchestrated this? And more importantly, what had he done to invite the wrath of the very people he had dismissed as unimportant? The answer, he feared, was about to unfold in ways he never could have anticipated. Ethan Caldwell stood frozen as the soldiers continued their sweep through his beloved Lexington Grand Hotel. His mind raced with questions, but one thing was painfully clear: he was no longer in control. Captain Daniel Hayes, the veteran Ethan had thrown out just hours ago, now stood before him, his expression unreadable. Ethan could hardly believe it. This man, this nobody, was leading the operation that threatened everything he had built. A high-ranking officer approached, his uniform crisp, his presence commanding. "Mr. Caldwell, we need to have a conversation," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Ethan forced himself to straighten his posture. "On what grounds are you doing this?" "I demand answers." The officer didn't flinch. "We have intelligence that suggests criminal activity is being conducted within this establishment. More specifically, the trafficking of illegal arms and money laundering through your hotel's financial systems." Ethan scoffed, but there was an undeniable tremor in his voice. "That's absurd. I run a legitimate business." The officer motioned to a soldier who handed him a file. Our investigation says otherwise. We've been monitoring this location for months. Offshore accounts, large cash transactions with no paper trail, and connections to known criminal enterprises. The final confirmation came when Captain Hayes here, he gestured toward Daniel, recognized this hotel's involvement during an ongoing federal investigation. Ethan's stomach turned to ice. This is some kind of mistake. He turned to Daniel, anger bubbling beneath his fear. You did this? Daniel met his gaze, his voice steady. I didn't do anything, Caldwell. Your own greed did. I just happened to be the one who finally put the pieces together. The room spun. Ethan had always prided himself on being untouchable. He had powerful friends, deep pockets, and an unbreakable reputation. But now, he was watching it all unravel. Mr. Caldwell, the officer continued, your accounts have been frozen. Your legal team is being contacted. You are not under arrest at this time, but if you attempt to leave, that will change. Panic clawed at Ethan's throat. You can't do this. I have connections. I have rights. The officer remained unmoved. And we have overwhelming evidence. As Ethan's mind reeled, he spotted one of the hotel staff, the concierge, a man who had worked for him for nearly a decade, watching from a distance. But instead of the usual deference, there was something different in his eyes. Was it satisfaction? Justice? Ethan turned away. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Hours later, the once grand Lexington Hotel was no longer a place of luxury, but a crime scene. Federal agents sifted through documents. Servers were confiscated, and security footage was being reviewed frame by frame. Ethan sat in his office, the heavy mahogany desk between him and the inevitable. Daniel entered, this time alone. He shut the door and leaned against the frame, arms crossed. You know, Daniel said, his voice calmer now. When I walked in here earlier today, all I wanted was a warm place to stay for the night. I wasn't looking for trouble. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. And yet, here we are. Daniel studied him for a moment. I served 3 tours overseas. I saw the worst of humanity. And when I came home, I realized that the battles didn't end. They just look different. The people in power, the ones who think they're untouchable, they're just as dangerous as any enemy I faced out there. Ethan exhaled sharply. So what? You think you're some kind of hero? Daniel shook his head. I think I just did what was right. For the first time, Ethan had nothing to say. His world had been built on calculated risks and ruthless decisions. But in the end, he had underestimated the one thing that had the power to destroy him: integrity. A knock on the door interrupted them. The officer from earlier entered, a pair of handcuffs in his hands. Mr. Caldwell, he said, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and aiding in illegal arms transactions. You have the right to remain silent. Ethan felt the cold steel wrap around his wrists. He had always believed wealth made him invincible, but now, as he was led away, he realized that in the end, justice was the one currency he could never control. The news broke within hours. Luxury hotel owner arrested in federal sting. Social media exploded, and those who had once feared Ethan Caldwell now reveled in his downfall. Employees he had mistreated spoke out. Former business partners distanced themselves. The mighty empire of Lexington Grand had collapsed in less than a day, and Daniel, he simply walked away, disappearing into the city, his mission complete. If you enjoyed this story, comment the word justice below. It's a reminder that no one is above accountability. And before you go, check out another mind-blowing story on the screen now. You won't believe what happens next.